Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. This PowerPoint will be about President James Madison, and we're focusing on creating a strong national government, and also this will fulfill the standard of repelling a foreign invasion. This is going to be the War of 1812. Some of the things that we'll focus on here will be you'll be able to explain why the U.S. declared war on Britain, what happened during the early days of the war, discuss the American invasion of Canada and the fighting in the South, and identify the events leading to the end of the War of 1812. Okay, what were some of the causes and effects of the War of 1812? Tension with Britain was high when James Madison took office in 1809. Britain had been arming Native Americans, and they continued impressing U.S. sailors. Again, American anger toward Britain was great. Now remember, this was a problem that goes back all the way to George Washington. This is nothing new. Many Americans felt a new sense of American nationalism at this time. Again, nationalism is a strong patriotic view of your country. In 1810, nationalists Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun joined the House of Representatives. They and their supporters were called war hawks. They supported war with Britain. So they enough was enough. They said it's time to go to war with England. Relations with Britain worsened steadily in early 1812. The British vowed to continue impressment, that is, capturing merchant sailors and forcing them to join the British Navy. Native Americans began new attacks on American settlers. So, as a country, you have to defend not only your property, but you have to defend your citizens. Think back to the preamble in the Constitution. Not only to to provide for the common defense. That's what a country does. In June 1812, Congress declared war on Britain. The war did not come at a good time for the British, who were still at war in Europe. Again, Britain had a two-front war, one in America, one in France. This is bad for Britain, perhaps good for us. However, Britain refused to meet American demands to avoid war. Americans were confident that they would win the war. However, the U.S. was not prepared. Jefferson's spending cuts had weakened the military. So remember, from the last president, when Jefferson came into office, because he was an anti-federalist from the Republican Party, he began to cut the budget for the federal government, and this weakened the military. The Navy had only 16 warships ready for action. The Army also had fewer than 7,000 soldiers. So we're not in good shape in order to fight the British. The War of 1812 was fought on several fronts. Again, if you look at the map here, you can see by looking at the different color coding, again, you could see this British blockade on the Atlantic coast. This is bad. Remember, we only had, 16 ships. This is not good. England had a superior fleet. Again, American forces are in the blue. We had issues down in the south. We had issues up in the north here. And Britain is the magenta type color. And again, the blue star would be American victories. So again, Lake Champlain, the Thames, Put-in Bay. If you pay attention or look up on the board, the chalkboard, you'll see "Don't give up the ship." That's Oliver Hazard Perry, the famous naval battle in the War of 1812, and his motto was simply "Don't give up the ship." But again, the War of 1812 was fought in many, many areas. Again, you have the Atlantic coast. In August 1812, the USS Constitution defeated the British warship Guerriere in the North Atlantic. Up by the pencil sharpener, I have a little model of the USS Constitution. It was never defeated. The ship's thick wooden hull earned it the nickname Old Ironsides. Despite the victory of the Constitution, Britain was able to set up a blockade of the American coast. Again, that's what's circled in red. And that's to not only keep us from receiving supplies, but for also sending exports out. This is hurting our economy. This is a major goal. This is why you have a Navy. And again, you try to not only put military pressure on a nation, but also economic pressure. Britain had closed off all American ports by the war's end. The Great Lakes and the Mississippi River were also important fronts, as you can see by the circled areas. As the war dragged on, Federalists expressed their opposition by calling it, quote, Mr. Madison's War. Again, remember, James Madison, at this point, he would be considered a Republican. And Madison and Jefferson kind of think of the two together, more anti-Federalist minded. Federalists, remember, they were pro-British, so that right from the start, they're not very happy about this. Many New Englanders opposed the war because the British blockade was hurting their trade. So again, just to bring this up to make it more understandable, remember the North was known for manufacturing. Many Federalists lived in the North, and they were upset by this British blockade because it was hurting their business. It was hurting their trade. So the Federalist Party, not as comfortable with this war as, say, the Republican or Anti-Federalist Party. In 1814, opposition was so high that delegates at the Hartford Convention suggested that New England secede from the United States. So I want you to take that in there. Secede means leave the United States. There were so many Federalists, so much opposition, this was an idea on the table. And again, literally to have New England pull away from the United States. The British made their final attacks in 1814. In August 1814, they attacked Washington, D.C. The president fled. The Capitol was burned. On September 13th, they moved on to Fort McHenry in Baltimore. Americans won this battle, which also inspired the U.S. national anthem. Again, if you think about Francis Scott Key, he was the one that created the poem, Star-Spangled Banner. Again, he was on a ship, or he was on a British ship. He was a prisoner. He was held overnight. Fort McHenry in Maryland was being attacked, was being bombarded. In the morning, when the smoke and the fog cleared, he saw the American flag was still flying, which meant that the fort had not been taken. He wrote down a nice poem, 4-stanza poem, the Star-Spangled Banner. In 1931, it becomes our national anthem. So sometime later, it was so impressed people that it would become our national anthem, 100 plus years later. Britain had tired of war. On Christmas Eve, 1814, the two sides signed the Treaty of Ghent. The Treaty of Ghent ended the war. It returned things to the way they had been before the war. Before this news reached the U.S., Americans won a final victory in the Battle of New Orleans in January 1815. So this battle, Battle of New Orleans, didn't even need to be fought. However, the war was over. It was pretty much a standstill. We didn't gain or lose any land, but we were able to stand up to the British. This was once again showing us that we had a strong national government. Some of the effects of the end of the War of 1812, the Hartford Convention ended quickly. Again, there was no more talk about New England seceding. The U.S. had secured independence from Britain once and for all. This was you might say, a second war of independence. And finally, Americans felt pride and confidence. Once again, we had stood up to a major world nation, and we were able to, keep what we had. Again, the following slides are additional items of importance that occurred during President James Madison's administration. In 1811, the charter of the First Bank of the United States ran out. Remember, it was only initially started for 20 years. That's it, just 20 years. The bank closed after that, so no more national bank. State banks made too many loans. Spending increased and prices rose, and the economy suffered. So these are some problems. In other words, what do we do about the, quote, national bank? Do we renew it again or not? The Second Bank of the United States was created in 1816. This boosted the economy. So remember, the national bank was controversial. The Republicans generally didn't favor it. They said, read the Constitution strictly word for word. Let the states handle things. Let states have their own banks. Federalists were more favorable toward a national bank. under the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution. Another problem the U.S. faced after the War of 1812 was foreign competition. Before the war, the Embargo Act kept British goods out of the U.S. This was an idea that Jefferson had to punish Britain for Britain's actions. And again, the Embargo Act kept goods out of the U.S. This helped American industry grow rapidly. In other words, forced people to rely more on American goods. After the war, British manufacturers looked to sell their goods in the United States. In other words, there's no more Embargo Act. This caused the American economy to suffer. Britain produced goods more cheaply than did the United States. Again, think back to mercantilism in colonial America. We sent over the lumber, we sent over the tobacco. England used those items, whether it be lumber or cotton. They made clothes, they made manufactured products, and then they shipped them back to the U.S. So England always had a very, very strong manufacturing base. And England began to dump their goods into the American market. So they're flooding the market with cheap imports. And Americans are buying it. It's a good product. It's cheap. Why would you buy the American product when it's more expensive? So again, as you can see, many New England businesses failed. Factory owners asked Congress for protection. Congress responded with the Tariff of 1816, which put a tax on many foreign products. Tariffs helped northern factories compete with the British. Many Northerners supported tariffs. Again, the North is known for its manufacturing. These businesses wanted protection. Tariffs forced Southerners to pay more for goods. And again, most Southerners opposed high tariffs. The reason being, the South traditionally bought their goods from Europe. So again, now that they bought their goods from Europe and they sent a lot of their agricultural products overseas, they're going to have to pay more for goods. They feel that the North is not playing fairly, that the North is not looking out for their Southern interests. By increasing the cost of imported goods, tariffs help U.S. manufacturers compete with foreign manufacturers. If you look at the chart here, this kind of explains it. Let's just say that you have a cost of cloth. You could see that it's more expensive in the United States, $1 more. The cost to manufacture the product, again, is more in the United States. Shipping cost is a bit lower because it doesn't cost as much to ship to another state versus, all the way to England. So at this point, again, it's cheaper to buy British goods. However, if you add a tariff that's a tax on British goods, you'll see that the overall price of cloth is cheaper in the United States thanks to this tariff, and it makes the British cloth more expensive. That's the point of how a tariff would work. But the higher prices hurt consumers. Consumers are people that buy. Henry Clay argued that high tariffs would benefit the entire country. Remember, he's thinking for the North. He was saying that this would be wealth for manufacturers, and his belief was the South and West, the northern manufacturers could afford to buy their farm products, and the government could use revenue to improve infrastructure. This was his reasoning. Clay's plan, called the American system, was never fully put into practice. Again, the following video about James Madison and how the Americans and British faced off in the War of 1812 can be found on the online academy. This is called the War of 1812, video number 1. It's about 3 minutes and 10 seconds long. So at this point, double check that you've done your I can statements and go ahead and watch this video. But you've seen not only some of the War of 1812, but some other problems such as tariffs and the Second National Bank. These are some big concepts that are swimming around James Madison. Okay, thanks for listening, and feel free to rewind and if you need to.